It's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This year, Queens Public Library joins our nation in paying homage to the visionaries and trailblazers who have shaped AANHPI history, made lasting contributions to our country, and continue to influence our collective future. Join us for our special programs and enjoy our book recommendations, resources, and much more at queenslib.org/AANHPI. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and QPL is joining the national movement to bring awareness to mental health and to fight the stigma that surrounds it. We're also offering programs, workshops, and resources designed to help teens build the coping strategies that will assist them now and in the future. Visit queenslibrary.org to learn more. New York City's libraries are facing massive budget cuts. These cuts would force QPL to end Saturday service at most of our branches, reduce our classes and programs, carry fewer books and library materials, and postpone necessary repairs. We need your help. Visit queenslib.org/take action and send a message to your elected officials today.
Good afternoon. This is Heidi Gelliver, and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 11th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Today, we are very privileged to have two amazing women with us to talk about Everything, Nothing, Someone, written by Alice Carriere. Alice is here with us today to discuss her book, which I really can't praise enough. I found it to be a nakedly honest, disarming tale of what it is like to come of age as the daughter of the well-known artist Jennifer Bartlett and German actor Matthew Carriere in New York City. The book takes us through a time in her life where she is struggling to find herself through bouts of dissociation, hospitalization, and relationships with troubled men. She takes us with her on a vivid ride through her experience, sparing little detail. There is power in the telling of this story, and this really came through for me while listening to the audiobook, which Alice narrates, making it a great listen read by the author. I always love when authors are able to read their stories on audiobooks. And then also we have with us today Muffy Meyer. Muffy Meyer is a documentary filmmaker who has been making films for over 50 years. Her most famous directorial credit is for the documentary Grey Gardens, which she made with the Maysles brothers and Ellen Hovde. She is now working on a film which is about what happened to a funny and feisty but desperately poor white family that the same team filmed in 1976. So I'm so happy to have both of you here. Let's get started.
Great. Well, first of all, Alice, I absolutely loved your book. I read it in like 2 sittings, which is a slow read.
Brave woman. Well done.
So I thought maybe the best thing to do would be to start by asking you to briefly describe for your book for people who hadn't read it, what my high school teacher used to call a précis.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm super honored to be here. I could say lots of beautiful, fancy words about how important libraries are, but let's just say super important. So just so happy to get to be here and talk to both of you. So I tell the story of being the daughter of 2 deeply self-absorbed, self-destructive artists who lived in an alternate universe where the power of their minds could shape reality. My mother, as you mentioned, was a renowned painter whose implanted false memories of ritualized sexual abuse and murder made her hide in her work and hide from intimacy with other people. My father was this iconoclastic European film star and intellectual who treated parenthood as this kind of radical experiment in the total annihilation of boundaries. So I was flooded by their complicated desires and deficits, and I became everything. Then when I reached adolescence, a dissociative disorder kind of wiped out the last puff of diffuse self that I had. I couldn't recognize my face in the mirror. I didn't know where my voice was coming from. I had no connection to my own mind, my body, my feelings, my history, the people in my life. I was convinced that I did not exist, and I became nothing. And I responded to this by self-harming in the form of cutting, burning, destructive relationships with men, substance abuse, and psychiatrists responded to that by prescribing me more and more and more psychotropic medication until a cocktail of 9 medications triggered a massive psychotic break that lasted a year and nearly killed me. And throughout all of this, my only tether to myself and to reality was writing. And then eventually my partner of 16 years, my husband, Gregory, and his patience, compassion, kindness, he's a recovering addict and alcoholic. And he really taught me to turn outward and connect with other people, which enabled me to care for my mother while she descended into dementia, to confront and reconnect with my father, and to basically write myself into a place where I could feel for others and become someone. So that's it.
Perfect description.
Thank
That's
you.
really great. I think, did you want to start maybe by reading a little bit?
Yes. So I have 2 little excerpts that I think really get across this sense of diffuse identity and lack of boundaries that I grew up in. And one is page 5, and I'm giving a tour of this massive modern mansion I grew up in that was completely designed and devised by my mother. So I'll just dive right in. There were no locks on the doors inside the house. The doors were just sheets of opaque glass and steel frames. Not even the bathroom doors had locks. Nanny once walked in on me masturbating and said, "Oh dear, I forgot you are a woman now," and walked out. Nanny once walked in on me cutting myself and cried. No locks meant I couldn't say, "Keep out." When I was 6, I put a no smoking sign on my door. It didn't work. My parents were both chain smokers, and their smoke entered the room before they did, making my eyes water and my throat itch. Only mythic beings could do that, make their presence known inside another person's body. The boundaries were porous. In this house, one could not tell the difference between fantasy and reality, art and object, parent and child. In this house, I couldn't tell what I was to my mother. In this house, I couldn't tell if I was my father's daughter, wife, or mother. The bathroom attached to my bedroom had 2 entrances, one from the hallway and one from my room. When my mother had parties and I was in my room, people sometimes didn't notice the door connecting to my bedroom and didn't close it, so I could hear them pee. Sometimes I could even see them if the mirrored door reflected into my bedroom. I liked to watch them, and I liked the moment when they realized they had been seen. There would be a fat pause as they tried to remember what sounds they had made or what parts of them had been exposed. They would clear their throat before they zipped or yanked up their pants, before fabric fell back over knees. In this house, our most secret selves and our most private moments were meant to be spectated and thought about. The toilet flushed with an intensity that made me jump every time. The taps of the sink and bathtub and shower were marked with C and F for chaud and froid, the French words for hot and cold. People unfamiliar with the house often scalded themselves when they washed their hands. The house forced you to move differently. It could be a bewildering, even harmful place if you didn't know its rules. It was as if I lived inside my mother's mind. Everything had been designed especially for her and her alone. The space was built to accommodate the particularities and peculiarities of her gestures and habits. The house had many horizontal surfaces, daybeds, kitchen counters, spacious hearths, hardwood floors, on which she could assume her typical recumbent pose, on her side, arm cocked to prop up her head while smoking or reading or talking on the phone. She spread herself out on these domestic plateaus like Manet's Olympia, and life lived itself around her. She had transformed this place from a factory into a fortress, an irresistible nexus of strangeness, luxury, and niche functionality, the architecture of my mother's desires. Everything around us had her in it. She designed her own jewelry. A gemologist who rode a unicycle and had worked with the Hope Diamond was her collaborator. The pieces so elaborate that they tested the limits of engineering. She designed her very own uncomfortable furniture. She designed and commissioned our drinking glasses, hand-blown cylinders so light you could hardly tell there was anything in your hand. The concept behind them was to create something as close to nothing as possible, but still be functional. I hated them because I couldn't stop breaking them. And I had to use them because they were part of the fundamental routine of my life, which meant destroying them would also have to be a fundamental routine of my life. Even the most utilitarian aspects of our lives were impossible to negotiate, conceptualized beyond utility, aestheticized beyond the physics of living. And then here's a very short section about a dissociative break that I have when I'm 18, which is the culmination of years and years of a detachment that had been encrusting me as I grew up. I moved blankly through unstructured days. I looked up stripping jobs in the city. I researched writing letters to death row convicts. I sat in my room, wondering if lonely men waiting to die in a club or in a prison could give me purpose. I didn't have the follow-through for either activity. Some nights I drank myself to sleep. Other nights I cut myself to sleep. During the day, I sat in my room trying to write and listening to Nanny talk to herself in the kitchen. Nanny, now 77, had retired, and my mother had invited her to live with us for the remainder of her life. Nanny was lonely, and her disembodied voice sneaked her loneliness into me, past my door with no lock, until I was crowded with both of our alienation, jam-packed with an emptiness that would grow bigger than I could have ever imagined. I was trying to be normal, and what normal looked like was hanging out with a guy with a soul patch and taking a giant hit from a bong, which I'd never done. I inhaled deeply and held my breath for as long as I could. As I exhaled, I felt the smoke take everything I was with it. I heard myself say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa," over and over. I couldn't stop saying "whoa," as if the sound would somehow adhere me to the body I was now far, far away from. I crawled to the bathroom, locked myself inside, and lay on the floor. I stared at the warning on the side of a bottle of Clorox spray that lay under the sink a few inches away from my face. I tried to read the words over and over again, but I had no idea what contact with eyes or call poison control meant. And the less sense they made, the more panicked I became. My body boomed with heartbeats, an empty, shuddering shell on the floor of a bathroom. I touched my face, my arm, trying to convince myself that the membrane between inside and outside was still intact. The feeling of my skin on me made me sick, and I began to vomit. I flushed the toilet, and it started to overflow. I slid slowly across the floor as the water inched toward me. When it finally reached me, I opened the door, ran through the living room, and out the front door. I ran barefoot through the streets, the guy with the soul patch running after me. A cop car drove by, and I flagged it down. Soul Patch told them I had smoked weed and needed to go to the emergency room. Could they take me? The cops told me that they could take me, but they'd also have to arrest me. Take a cab, I was advised. Soul Patch hailed a cab as I sat in the fetal position on the curb. I was sent home from St. Vincent's Hospital with a piece of paper telling me about panic attacks, but I knew it was something more. I went to sleep that night hoping unconsciousness would reverse the horrifying depletion that had taken place. But I awoke the next morning and fell, breathless, into a room I could barely recognize, a body I could barely feel, and a mind I could barely follow into perception. The unmistakable arrhythmia of the disconnect, as I had begun to call it, that had been disrupting my life was now louder, more insistent, a second heart that beat along with my original heart, out of time, out of body. Thank you. That's it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Amazing.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about one of the things that really impressed me in both of these segments that you read is the way your physical world interacted with your emotional life. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about it.
That's been such an important ongoing theme in my life. And I think that I've always found being embodied so grotesque and strange and surreal. And I'm so confused about how everyone seems so casual about it. And, you know, I dealt with that strangeness first through cutting. And then I used language as a way to kind of cram myself into corporeality in a way that didn't make me want to squirm out of myself. I started cutting when I was 7 years old on a bizarre instinct. And then when I developed the ability to storytell and write, that's what would make me feel most housed in my body. And my favorite anecdote about the intersection of language and body is the story of the worm in a mental institution. And basically, I was in a very fancy mental hospital for a year and 3 months. And I was totally dissociated. I didn't believe I was alive, that I had a body, that I existed. And then one day I excreted an intestinal worm. And it was as if my body was translating itself into poetry, essentially, that I could understand. And my body was telling me, no, there is something vital and alive in you that is impossible to ignore. So it was this way, and sort of my life has always met me when I've tried to retreat from it. So it was very much like the universe was saying, it was a gift. It was saying, you're having a hard time understanding what's happening right now in the language, the physical language that it's being communicated in. Here is the perfect metaphor that you have literally just pulled out of your ass. So that was a moment for me where language and body came together in a really resonant way.
That's an amazing story and very much a metaphor. Yeah. And I've heard self-harm being described as soothing for people who do it.
It absolutely was. It was also, I mean, it releases endorphins, it releases opioids. So on a physical level, it is soothing, but it was also something that was completely mine. It was a way to reinstate causality, because as a dissociator, I felt completely out of time, out of linearity. Every moment felt like the first moment in the history of time, repeating over and over again. So there's no context, nothing. So cutting was a way to reinstate causality. I would cut one day, the wound would open, and then I would watch it heal. And that would tell me that I had a body and that body was moving through time, whether I wanted to or not.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And it became a way to punish myself, reward myself. It served many purposes. At times it was like giving myself a hug. So, yeah.
And did you have any sense that your mother was different from other kids' mothers?
That's a great question. No. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very bullied as a kid. And we were in this fortress, this massive fortress. I had never seen any TV except Charlie Chaplin, by the time I was 13. So when my friends, when the people in my grade would talk about, oh, the latest episode of Friends is on, I literally thought they were talking about Friends that I didn't have. So I had no touchstones. It was very much, I didn't know how to use a tampon until I was 14 because no one told me. I knew all the lyrics to Bertolt Brecht's Three Penny Opera, but I didn't know basic things about how other people lived. So I had no idea. Even as I was writing this book, I would say to my editor, is this boring? Is this normal? And she'd go, Alice, this is all complete, her jaw would be on the floor. So I think I'm only just still learning at 38 how deeply unconventional, to put it lightly, my family and my family was.
Yeah. No, it's
and also she couldn't tell the difference between what was, she was, so much of her life was influenced by these false memories that were implanted in her. So already the foundation was not necessarily true. She built a lot of her life and some of her work on false memories of being used in a satanic sex cult.
Huh.
So what was normal, and that was normal to her, and she told people about it very bluntly and then made work about it. So yeah, I'm only just learning till this day what was going on with all of us.
Yeah. And at what point did you begin to discover that about your mother, that what she was saying was not necessarily grounded in actual fact?
Right. So first I discovered what had happened, what she alleged had happened to her, in a way that I think really encapsulates our relationship and what it did to her, and as a family, our self-mythologizing and dispassionate way of being journalists of our own lives. Because I was 11 years old, I was snooping in her things at the behest of my father. They were going through an acrimonious divorce. He wanted me to find out who she was calling as witnesses. And I found her journal where she very bluntly described having a flashback while giving my father a blowjob, and then described the flashback. And I confronted her when she came up from the studio, and she sat down and she very calmly, dispassionately told me the following story: that Bertie and Russell, a married couple who were friends with her mother and father, had used her and all of the children of the maids in the neighborhood in orgies. And there was a ritualized aspect, and that they had in front of her murdered a 7-year-old boy through erotic asphyxiation and made her bury the body on the beach. And she went into great, great detail, more than I'm going to go into now, and then went up and took the nap she took every day for 2 hours. And then we didn't talk about it again. So there was this, and I've already forgotten the question. Oh yeah. So I found out later that, I don't know when the moment was, but I grew up and I learned about the Satanic Panic, which was a moral hysteria that swept the nation in the 80s and 90s, where one facet of it was overzealous clinicians took kind of innocuous signs of maybe trauma and constructed these elaborate scenarios and implanted, through hypnosis and other methods, implanted false memories of satanic sexual abuse. And it destroyed families. And when I learned about that, and then I spoke with her friends who described the process of watching her fall under the spell of this narrative. So that's when I started, maybe 15 years ago, understanding what really happened.
That's really interesting. And I remember exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it affected my husband's family.
Oh, really?
Implanted memory thing. Yeah. False implanting sexual pederast type memories.
And it's so, I understand why it's so tempting, because I think just by nature of being a woman in the world that she suffered and she had trauma. But I think she needed something that was so elaborate and outlandish to excuse her never processing and overcoming it. Because when Satan is your villain, you're justified in dealing with the trauma by drinking, smoking, and working all the time, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I
It's
get it.
convenient. It's like a convenient way to sort of displace a lot of the stuff that you might have to take responsibility for,
Exactly.
you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I think and I'm sort of just jumping in here, but your book is definitely a lot about boundaries, boundaries that should have existed and didn't, or interpersonal boundaries, or walls that existed but that were destructive. And I'm wondering, you know, can you talk about that? Like how your relationship with your own boundaries has changed over the years?
So, yes, I will answer two parts of that. So I dealt with the boundarylessness because I really, as I read in the excerpt, I couldn't tell. There was a time where I thought what happened to my mom had happened to me. I couldn't, and then the idea that transmission of trauma then pushed aside the idea that I was experiencing my own very real trauma. So I dealt with the boundarylessness by storytelling. So first, when I was little, I would think in the third person. I would say, she is walking down the street, the rain falls on her jacket, and I turn myself into a story, which I think is a type of imposing of a boundary. I think it's the wrong boundary at the wrong moment. And then I used writing. I would confine my experience to an 8x11 page, and then that was my way of separating my experience from other people's. And I think I've realized that the boundarylessness was extremely destructive, but it also gave me everything I needed to heal myself. So an example of that would be the dissociation, which is a visceral dissolution of all boundaries, boundaries between the self and the self, between the self and others. It nearly killed me, but it also gave me the ability to embody other people's lived experiences in a really profound way, and then hopefully relay it really evocatively. And so and then in the same vein, I was able to really understand my mother, imbue her with the humanity she didn't imbue herself with because of the dissociation. And then also the lack of boundaries with my father was similarly super destructive, but it facilitated our reunion and his redemption. Because it was only because we could say anything to each other that we could say everything we needed to. So I guess now my biggest issue, not to turn this into a therapy session, but I still struggle with oversharing and the feeling that unless I share everything about myself, I don't really exist. So I'm learning to keep things to myself and for myself. And there I will end the answer.
And here you are sharing it with everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
And yet, it feels to me, that sharing seems like a wonderful gesture. It helps other people. So don't hold it in too much.
That's true. I'm terrible at holding it in, so don't worry. I'm failing already.
I mean, it really, in a way, it's a gift because this book is so amazingly written. Like, I really enjoyed listening to it. And I mean, just to have the ability to let go like that, I feel is a real gift and a talent because, and how, it's a shame that it came to you in this way, right? But it just makes for great storytelling.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about your father, because we haven't, you've talked a lot about your mother and that part of the book.
Oh, that's all question. Okay. Yes. So he was the protege of Gilles Deleuze, who was a famous philosopher and espoused a lot of really, I guess some people call anarchic beliefs about everything from government to sexuality. So he was sort of my father was in the sway of this really radical philosophical movement. And he was an actor, and he's just a very intense person. And he, I think, used me in a way to enact a lot of these philosophical theories. So there was an oversharing of information that was often really sexualized, that was for him just sort of his way of being in the world. And for me was deeply confusing, and resulted in, I mean, he would share highly sexualized stories. He would want to change the world of cinema by having a movie where the father and daughter starred as lovers and had sex on screen, and we were going to star in it. So it was really challenging, and it resulted in a lot of confusion for me. But then what happened is that when that coincided with the psychiatric abuse that I endured for years, the over-medication, I also attended a trauma group where I was, similarly to what my mom experienced, told unequivocally that he had molested me, that he was a monster, that I should never speak to him again. And I eventually, I listened to the advice for 12 years. So we were estranged for 12 years. And then I said, screw it. I'm doing what feels right. And I'm doing what I want to do. I'm making a choice to confront him and allow him to speak. And when we had that sort of summit in Paris, where I confronted him about every time I felt violated, he was so receptive, so appropriately full of shame. And we now have an incredible relationship. And I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of us. He's so proud of this book. He was at the book launch in New York. And, turns out he's not a pedophile, spoiler alert, but we managed to construct a reality that we can live in together and that feels right for both of us. And it's one of the greatest gifts.
That's amazing.
Amazingly healing.
And that probably impacted your relationship with your husband.
Well, it's actually my relationship with my husband that made all of that possible, because he was the buffer. He constructed all the rules and the parameters for how we could talk to each other. He is so kind and giving. And what's sort of exciting about the book for me is that it lives its message. The way it was written is an embodiment of its message. So the way that it's all about human connection. And for instance, to talk about my husband, Gregory, the way that I edited it was to read the entire manuscript aloud to him 7 times. Whoa. And he would pace back and forth, and at times pause, and he'd yell, "Wait, what are you trying to say? What do you feel?" And then I would yell sentences at him until one of us would go, "That's it." And then we'd high five. So the content, the subject matter, the content, and the way I wrote it is all one and the same. And it's human connection.
It's amazing. And it also just seemed to naturally have a great arc, It seemed to.
That's thanks to the title, the final discovery of the title. So, I mean, is this a good time to talk about the craft of it?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. So because it started out a long time ago, because I've been writing this never not been writing it. So it started out as a collection of short stories about every time I'd been to an emergency room or hospital. And it was gruesome, it was clinical, and there were no discernible feelings whatsoever. And then I freed myself of the over-medicating. I got sober, and I was able to access feeling. And then, of course, Gregory helped me with that too. And then it really became about turning outward and connecting with other people. And then I landed on the title really late in the game. And the title enabled me to look back and see all of the poetry and parallels that were just lying scattered around my life. And my whole life took on this narrative arc I hadn't seen before, this poignancy that I hadn't seen before. And it was like being introduced to myself for the first time.
Wow.
So the power of a good title.
Yeah, exactly. And how did that title happen? Did you just have a click and there it came?
It's funny because at first I was trying to take a cue. My mother wrote, being a famous artist wasn't enough. She also wrote a book, and it's a thinly veiled autobiography called History of the Universe, and which would make her the universe, which feels super right. And I was trying to first take my cues from her, everything that she considered herself an entire universe. So I had the everything, but then that didn't feel right to who I was. And that was another example of sort of being overtaken by one of my parents. So then it clicked. I mean, just one day, the everything, nothing, someone. Because I was trying to be really literal. Like, what are 3 words that encapsulate my entire life? And those 3 words existed and they fit well together. So
yeah,
I think it makes perfect sense. Especially after, when you read the whole book, it just makes, the way it's divided up, the title makes perfect sense. So yeah, it's good that a lot of times titles, you don't come to them until the end, of a project, because you can't really, like there's
exactly,
you don't know what it is yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And I realized when I landed on the title that prior to that moment, I had no idea what my book was about.
Sure.
And then suddenly I knew, and then that was a good
it's just the creative process. You're like, we're always just going to go through it, and then it doesn't usually occur to people, I think, until the end. Really makes sense. Yeah. But you also brought some photos. We have some photos that you are sharing with us. So maybe we could take a look at some of those now, and then you can just sort of guide us through what we're seeing, and maybe it'll sort of jar some anecdotes.
Absolutely. So this is a photo of the Carrières, my father's family. My father is on the right. Then his sister, my Oma Jutta, my grandfather Bern, and my late uncle Till. So the family grew up. My father grew up in a small town in Germany, and he grew up in mental institutions, mental hospitals. So his father was a psychiatrist, and he was working in this sort of experimental ecosystem where it was a mental hospital, but the patients lived with the doctors and worked in the mental institution. So his 2 babysitters, for instance, one was a woman who had been committed for trying to burn her children alive. And his other babysitter was a man who was convinced that God was turning him into a woman so he could have a child with him. So my father grew up already sort of not understanding the difference between madness and sanity, if there even is one, and being so open to the entire spectrum of human experience and perceptual experiences. And then my uncle Till committed suicide at the age of 26. And and Oma never fully, she erected a shrine to him. She would tell me that we were exactly alike. We would have loved each other. And I deified Till. I was convinced that he was the only person who could understand me and that he held some kind of secret. So from a very young age, I was sort of enmeshed in their trauma and their tragedy in a way that formed my identity.
Yeah, it's like the further it's sort of like makes more sense, there's no boundaries there either, really. I mean, so it sort of makes sense that would transform, into his daughter.
Right.
If we want to go to the next photo.
Yeah, this is just my father on a film set, really giving, film star vibes. So
very handsome.
This is my mother in her element, white wine, cigarette, paint splattered shirt. It's just, and she was extremely glamorous, but from 6 a.m. until 7 p.m., she was in that studio in a paint splattered shirt working.
So you feel like this just like embodies her in that state?
Yeah, completely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, next one.
Yeah. This, I was raised by a British nanny. And this is a moment where you can really see that she was the force that grounded me in all the chaos.
Wow.
Beautiful photo.
And she was hired for her ability to handle unconventional problems. So that was a rare moment of self-awareness of my parents, where they correctly identified their whole ethos.
Amazing. And you had
So
quite a close relationship with her throughout your life.
Extremely, extremely close. And she retired and lived with us until her death. Lived with my mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Next photo.
So this is little Alice. There is coffee in that cup. And, you know, I think it says it all. This is exactly who I was and who I am. I was a little adult and I became really adept at, you know, being what the adults around me needed me to be until I couldn't do it anymore. So this is the little girl who would say, you know, welcome to the house. Would you like a tour? And, you know, she probably knows all the words to the Three Penny Opera in German. So yeah.
That's amazing. I love the little adult thing, because this picture is just so beautifully shows that.
Yes.
You
Even
know,
the pose.
I kind of want to be her when I grow up, honestly.
adorable.
Yeah, she seems very self-possessed there.
Yeah, right.
Very much so. Yeah. Next one.
So this is 134 Charles Street where we lived. It was a 17,000 square foot former factory, and my mom created, there was an indoor pool, 2 layers of gardens. You know, my mom, it was in the West Village, and she just brought it from an abandoned factory to this extraordinary home.
Wow.
So yeah.
So this looks like it's probably a view from the roof next door.
Yes, exactly.
It's amazing because you can see all of the shrubbery and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It just looks like a whole world amongst itself, you know.
And yes, exactly. She meticulously designed this with Madison Cox, who's an amazing garden designer. And I think it's so interesting because she loved to be surrounded by living things, because she always felt like she was killing things. And if she touched something, it would die. And I just thought that was the most poignant, heartbreaking thing, because I heard her say that. And I think that's what makes me feel like her remoteness was an act of tremendous love rather than any kind of neglect.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because she was afraid that if she touched me, I would die. And I almost did, but it wasn't. Yeah. So I think that always really moves me to see the gardens she created, because I know where that instinct and that need comes from.
Yeah, it's great that you're able to understand her on such a deep level now as an adult. You know, I'm sure it wasn't that easy when you were a child to make sense of it, though, the distance.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, next photo.
Okay, so this is Baby's First Mental Hospital. It is day 1 where I go to Austin Riggs, where I was there for a year and 3 months. And when I left, they told me, we hope to see you here again. Yes. So this was the beginning of the psychiatric care that went terribly, terribly wrong. And I think it's very indicative of who I was at the time that I felt the need to memorialize my first day at my first mental hospital. And I thought for a very long time that my only access to specialness was pathology. And I think that made me particularly vulnerable to the rampant over diagnosing and over medication that I endured for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And that I managed to free myself of only at the age of 30, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's very hard to free yourself of over medication. I know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's scary. And it's a lot about taking back your own agency. And as someone who dissociates, you know, I'm not an expert on anything, not even myself. So being able to say, this doesn't feel right, and it's not for me was huge.
Yeah, just so
especially against all those experts who
Exactly.
are telling you, you need this, you won't live without it.
Exactly. And I think what's tricky for me with, and what I've realized about my mental health journey, especially as someone who was diagnosed with so many things that turned out to just be the massive quantities of Adderall and benzodiazepines I was prescribed at the age of 20, is that mental health is a developing story. It's not dynamic. It's not static. I mean, it's dynamic. It's not static. And diagnoses change, feelings change, behaviors change. And it's something I wish that my family, okay, that's oversharing a little bit, but like people I know in my world, I wish they understood that just because I had a medication induced psychosis or struggled with this over medicating my whole life, it doesn't mark me for life. And the ways in which it does mark me are actually assets. I mean, those experiences don't mean I'm constantly on the cusp of catastrophe. They broaden the scope of my perspective and my empathy.
100%. Yeah. I mean, you can, just from having those kinds of experiences, I feel like in a lot of ways, that's what this book does, just by speaking your story, just by putting it out there, I think it's inevitably going to help other people to understand themselves if they've gone through something similar. And it's sort of like almost like a roadmap that other people can learn from. And you don't necessarily need to talk about, how it would help them. Is just the storytelling, like stories are powerful in that way. It's just like, if we speak our truth, then, it definitely helps everyone.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Next photo.
One.
Yeah. So this is my father being crucified in Berlin. And he was an activist for fathers' rights. So I think this really speaks to the way that I was taught that our opinions, our experiences were meant to be turned into art or performance or stories. Because, I mean, look at the story of this photo. Yeah. The props, the accoutrement, I mean, it's all there.
Absolutely.
So this is the kind of thing I grew up with. So yeah, next photo.
It's completely amazing.
Yeah.
So this is one of the my favorite photos. It's a couple of years ago, my mom had descended into dementia, and we really found our way to each other when she was diagnosed. Because obviously it takes a lot away, this disease, but it really gave, because it freed her of her implanted memories. It freed her of the feeling that she would never have enough, never do enough, never be enough. And that left her just available to be warm and curious. And it freed me of my tumultuous history, of the reputation of being a mental patient and a screw up. And then that just allowed me to be her daughter. So this is this rare moment where, not rare, I mean, in her illness, she was tender and curious and all the things she hadn't been when I was growing up. And this is a photo by my dear friend, Jamie Diamond, who's a photographer, and she captured it. And and my mom died 18 months ago, and I'm just, it's a moment where we did miss each other. We missed the opportunity to be peers, even though she did read the first 30 pages of my book and loved it. But if I couldn't sort of be a peer, a creative peer to the great Jennifer Bartlett, I could at least be the daughter whose hand she wanted to hold. So that felt really healing and special.
Yeah. I remember my business partner also had dementia. And the thing that I noticed about it was that because everything else disappeared, you live completely in the moment.
Yes.
And that picture looks like people who are living in that moment,
And it's so funny you mentioned that, because I am not good at that. I am so bad at living in the moment, but the person who's great at it is my husband. And he's a virtuosic carer. And he really helped me so much in trying to figure out how to just be with my mom. So
well, you can see that in this picture. You can see that you succeeded in that picture.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful shot. Beautiful
Thanks.
capture.
Next photo. And then this is an example of because I reunited with my dad, I got to 18 months ago fly to Europe to take care of him while he went through radiation for cancer. And that was such a gift. And then, you know, we captured this photo of these two people who hadn't really spoken in 12 years. And, you know, it's simultaneously because of the dissociation and because of this book, that we are now a family again and can have this moment laughing together.
How come it doesn't make you mad that the psychiatric industry, I'll call it, encouraged you to not see your father for 12 years? You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm furious. I'm not great with anger because I've always turned it in on myself. So it's a great question. And I've been struggling with that because it's an anger that there's nothing I can do with it except write this book and talk about it. So I'm super angry, and I'm angry about a lot of other things. And I'm only just learning what that means to me and what to do with it and about it.
Yeah.
In a way that's not in an act that's not destructive to myself or to other people.
Yeah.
It takes some people a whole lifetime to learn that. So I think that you're already like miles ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll let my therapist know you said that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like just by going through all the therapy and everything, it just puts you ahead. I feel, you know, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And I wish more people would.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next photo. Okay, I mean, here's another example. My little sister, Elena, I disappeared from her life at a really formative age because of these doctors. And we are just starting to get to know each other again. And I love her. And the fact that we can all sit in a room and take a funny selfie below one of my mom's paintings. So there are actually 4 people in this painting. That's one of my mom's pieces. So, I mean, this says it all.
Yeah.
And I live in Paris part-time. And I just got back from an incredible, you know, couple months just visiting with them and being with them. So
They live in Paris?
My sister lives in Berlin. My father's in Paris.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, next photo.
It's a great photo.
And then here's the legendary Gregory. And yeah, we've been together 16 years, and we were together when both of us were almost dead. He was a heroin addict and alcoholic. He's been sober for 13 years. I've been sober 5.5 years. And we somehow were together when we were at our worst and then stuck it out until our best. So, and in so many ways, this book is many love stories. It's a love letter to writing. It's a love letter to Gregory. It's a love letter to human connection itself. So, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. And next photo. Oh, and this is my mom died 18 months ago. This was her memorial at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. Behind me is her most famous work, Rhapsody, which is something like 978 square steel plates. And it's supposed to be a conversation, which I think is, and something about Rhapsody is that she wanted the empty spaces. She wanted to create something that had no limits. And she wanted the empty spaces to be the main actor. And it was so moving for me to hear that, because it reveals to me that she had the same preoccupations I do with where things end and where things begin.
Back to boundaries.
Exactly. And it just makes me see all the ways in which we are so alike and all the ways in which we could have connected and how I still stay connected to her. And it reminds me that the only advice she ever gave me was just do the work. And that really helped distill the art making process and demystify it. And just doing the work is how I stay connected to her. So in this photo, I am reading an excerpt of my book in front of her work. So that's really powerful to me.
You're very good at metaphor, which is impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a reason I do what I do, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that about the empty spaces, and it makes so much sense about the boundaries. And I love that you have this body of work that you can still use to connect to your mother with, and that's an amazing thing to have in your life.
We're very lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
yep.
and as you were saying the thing about work, it occurred to me, just sort of in the way that you were saying it, that work is not just what we think of as professional work, you know, making a book, making art, but it's also the work on yourself to remake yourself or fix yourself or whatever one wants to call that.
Yeah, exactly right.
Which I think is really, really true.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we can open it up for questions from the audience, if there are any. And then, you know, so if you're watching on the live stream and you have any questions that you want to ask for Alice or Muffy or both, then please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, you know, we can, Muffy, if you have another question.
Yeah, I'll ask another question while we
Okay.
wait for chat questions. If you were giving advice to emerging writers, what would you be telling them? Us.
So I would transmit my mom's advice, just do the work. And I think the other most important piece of advice that applies not just to writing, but also to life is ask for help. And I was so stubborn and grandiose. I sent this book to everyone I knew. I asked for all the help that I could possibly. There's construction and phone ringing. It's like a crescendo with this answer. Sorry about that.
Oh, good. It makes it more authentic.
And I'm in like a really temperamental chair, so I keep almost flinging myself backwards. Okay, so yes, it's dramatic. So I would say I asked for help and I listened to it. One of the greatest gifts of my life has been my editor, Julie Grau, who is a legend and brilliant and kind and all the adjectives. And one of the greatest privileges of my life has been to have her give me feedback on my work and to teach me. And I ask her for help and I listen to it. And I think in life too, I'm really good at asking for help. And I think that's helped to save me, and it's helped me to make the best work that I can make.
Yeah, I think that's super
good
important.
advice.
So we do have a question here from Liv Forker. They say, what is it like after you've written and published a memoir as a young woman? Does your perspective and reflection on your life moving forward change?
That's a great question. So one thing I've been acutely aware of as a writer is that since the book's been published, I've had to really protect my sacred connection with writing. Because writing for me, I mean, I've wanted to be a writer since I was 6 years old. There was no backup plan. That was it. That was my purpose. That's the only thing that made any sense. So, and I wasn't doing it because I was published or I needed to, you know, give my editor another book or I needed to adapt the memoir or whatever. I mean, now that's the case. So in that new context, I have to be so protective of that pure connection to my craft because it feels like there's a threat that it might be contaminated. And I just have to remember little Alice. And little Alice is the key because every time I'm not feeling my immense gratitude for getting to be a writer, I mean, I tear up about this, getting to be a writer. Whenever I'm not feeling it, Gregory will go, little Alice, tell little Alice what's happening. And then that'll do it. I just start crying. So it's maintaining that connection to the real reason I do this and how freaking lucky I am I get to do this. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Jonathan Cardenas. Where is the best place to begin with writing a memoir?
Oh my gosh. Literally anywhere you want. It's again, just do the work. For me, what's really been liberating is committing because I'm also writing fiction now, and it's so daunting. I'm exclusively doing things I don't know how to do right now, and I commit to creating something really bad, and it's so liberating. There are no rules. I just go with whatever scene I'm compelled to write, whatever scene I want to write. I mean, I just let myself write whatever the hell I want, and I worry about everything else later. I mean, this started as a collection of short stories. Then I wrote a separate 700-page book about my family and my father. And then I had to combine them and then cut it down to 288 pages. I mean, you don't know what this is going to look like. So your only responsibility is to just get anything down on a page. And then it will become a habit the more you do it. So any concern with, am I doing this right? Do I start at the beginning, middle, or end, or a completely different destination? None of your business. Just start.
I think that's really great advice for all kinds of creative practices, like whether it's writing or filmmaking or painting or anything. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I remember, I can't remember whether I was being told this or I thought it myself, but that we're all trained to be much better critics than we are creators. And you simply have to kill the critic in yourself.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I love that. That's helpful. Thank you.
That is.
And good luck. Good luck. Just right. Just right.
Yeah.
So we have another question. Well, there's actually two questions here. Maybe I'll start with the first one from Dan. Thank you for your bravery in sharing your stunning memoir. Can you tell us some strategies for recovering?
Ooh, thank you so much. As I said, I'm not an expert in anything. So for me, I mean, it was asking for help. It was the luxury of time. Some tips for recovering. I mean, yeah, ask for help. I mean, for me, it was writing and a relationship that I just lucked into. So if you have, this is where I get stumped. Like, just ask for help and find that sacred little thing that tethers you to yourself and to the world, and cultivate it at all costs. We all have something, whether it's making a meal for something. I don't know how to cook. I don't cook, but I have friends who are brilliant cooks who that's how they connect, and that's how they feel alive, and that's how they ground themselves. So nurturing the thing that is just yours. And yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Really good advice. And then there's another question from Dan.
And also one thing is just also, you don't know the end of the story. The things that I identified as my greatest humiliations and my greatest misfortunes directly led to the best things that ever happened to me. So again, it's Muffy, it's what you're saying. Silence the critic. And that's not just about doing work. It's about your life. So you don't know how the story ends. So just keep living it. Keep living it. Yeah.
Great.
Keep living it and stay curious, I guess.
Yeah. And so there's another question here from Dan, and he says, can you each make a statement on the current rash of book bans in libraries in the USA? Why do you think this is?
I mean, it's egregious. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying. I hate speculating, and I could, speaking of anger, like this could unleash something truly, diluvian, but I don't know. Why don't you guys take this one and I'll, yeah. I'm angry, I'm pissed off, and I'm sad, and I'm scared.
I think in some ways it is a reflection of a way of reacting to other, other people reacting, who are scared, angry, etc., and
Right.
think that, or are taught that, or are convinced by political other politicians and political people that their children are being corrupted.
It's kind of like
by these books, that there's something. It feels like a loss of control to them, that they.
And I think, I think it's a testament to the power of books, that it's books that they are targeting. So we have to keep telling our stories.
Yeah.
100% agree with that. Then there's another question that came in from Alexandra Coburn. I'm writing an autofiction novel about the art world and my own traumatic experience that occurred within it. How do you separate the memoir you from you, liberate yourself from trying to tell an objective truth?
Great question. And I can't wait to read this book. Well, I think the realization that there is no objective truth helped. I mean, there is objective truth, but not. I think, okay, what it was is, in writing this book, I really learned that many things can be true at the same time, and how to stay coherent in that revelation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's, I can only talk about myself. It's why I'm uncomfortable giving advice, because I just say what I feel and what I'm experiencing in the prettiest words I can find at any given moment. I try and make that as true as it was in that moment. I think an acknowledgement that, even my relationship to my own truth in this book that's printed and I can't change will change over time. It's only been out for 6 months, and I'm already rereading it going, oh God, do I still feel this way? So art can only achieve so much. We can only achieve so much as fallible, dynamic humans, and that's the torment of, and the gorgeousness of, art making and living.
And that is a perfect ending.
Yes, 100%. And I know we do have to end. I just want to know if we can ask one last question. And that last question would be, if things could be different in the world in general in terms of mental health stigma, what would you want people to understand?
I mean, I think I answered this earlier, where I'd love people to understand that it's a developing story, and that the experiences I've had, as I said, they don't mark me, but the ways they do mark me are gifts and assets, and they make me more empathetic and able to listen. And I think also for me, empathy is not a zero-sum game. Like me forgiving my father and listening to his experience and believing him just as much as he believed me, it doesn't take away from the empathy that I can give myself and the ways in which I can believe in myself. It only fortifies it. So I think, yes, that to view mental health as something more evolving and dynamic, and to prioritize things like listening, asking for help, and empathy.
That's great.
Forgiveness.
Yeah. And I mean, forgiveness if you want. Also, what empowered me was I got to choose to forgive him because it's what I wanted to do. And as someone who dissociates and couldn't even own or identify their own desires, having that kind of agency was really healing. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everyone else has too. And I highly recommend reading Everything, Nothing, Someone. It was just an amazing book. So, it's available for purchase everywhere now, and also from the library. So you can also take it out from the library. Okay. So
Thank you so much for having me.
The hour flew by.
This was so fun.
Yeah.
Yes, it was so fun. I could go on forever, but I guess we really can't. So
Thank you.
yes, thanks so much, everybody.